ton about suffering and experiencing of God. And it taught me a ton about how our culture teaches you that the best in life is in the comfortable and in the convenient and in the safe and secure. And as I would leave Bonnie, I would always go, that's a lie. That's not the truth of the Bible. And that we experience the God who suffered on our behalf in these really mysterious, incredible ways through suffering. And Bonnie reflected a lot. Her and I, a few times in my meetings with her, would read these chapters or talk about these chapters from a book by Mike Mason called The Gospel According to Job. And I know for a fact her mom read that book with her consistently. And the story is about a guy. He writes these essentially reflections through deep amounts of suffering and beginning to experience the good news of God through the book of Job. And you're going to hear a song here in a little bit from Christy Brazelton that was reading Bonnie's journal when she was reflecting on Job 13:15, when Job says this, "Though he slay me," speaking of God, "though he slay me, I will hope in him. Yet I will argue my ways to his face." And that's as I saw Bonnie, I saw a pure, an incredibly pure faith that knew God can handle my questions. And I'm going to argue my ways to his face, and yet I'm going to recognize that he's God. And I'm going to submit myself to his ways no matter what he puts me through in the midst of it. And I just say that to go, she taught me unbelievable amounts about that. And one of the things, I could say a million, but one of the things was in the midst of suffering, when every temptation is to turn in on yourself and to think about yourself, this woman thought about other people on unbelievable levels in the midst of incredible suffering. And in that, I'll take that with me and be impacted by her forever. So I now have the opportunity to open to the floor with you guys, and I apologize for my emotion in the midst of that, not because I should apologize about emotion, but there is something really to be celebrated in this time, celebrating the life of Bonnie, both about how she's impacted us, both in the fact that she is in the presence of God, where there's fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore, and yet in the midst of that, there's this unique thing with death where you rejoice with her, and yet we mourn because we're going to miss her so tremendously. But she was an extraordinary gift of God, and we want to hear you guys have an opportunity to talk about that. When C.S. Lewis had a really good friend named Charles Williams, and when Charles Williams, C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and Tolkien, were all friends. And when Charles Williams died, C.S. Lewis made this incredible statement, and the insight only Lewis could make. And he said, when Charles Williams died, a piece of all the friends that used to hang out together died as well. And he said, I will never be able to experience that part of Tolkien again because only Charles Williams could bring that out of him. And this incredible insight, which is true of every individual. And that's one of the reasons moments like this are so helpful, is that Bonnie brought out things in you that nobody else could bring out, or taught you things that nobody else has taught you. And we want to hear about that, because then we all have an opportunity to get a fuller picture of how incredible this gift Bonnie Codier was that God gave so many of us. So I am going to ask you a few things in the midst of this. I know how many people she impacted, and I know we could talk for hours and hours and hours, and yet we don't have hours and hours and hours in this room. So I'm going to ask you to be very cognizant that other people in the room want to talk. And so I'm going to ask Matthew to come up and Aaron to come up. They're going to pass mics around. I'm going to stay up here to kind of facilitate the moments. But if you would try to keep it in a minute of just really to the point of what Bonnie meant to you, that would be great. And there's going to be a couple people in the midst of this that I want to make sure and share along the way. So if you will just raise your hand after somebody speaks, we'll make sure and get you the mic, and we'll get through as many people in about a 15 to 20 minute period as we can. So Sarah Newquist is going to start.
My name is Sarah, and Bonnie was very dear to me. I had to write it down so I can get through it, but Bonnie was an amazing lady. She is one of the best examples of following Christ and loving him in the place that he has you. She faced many trials, and yet there was almost always a smile on her face and joy in her heart. She never questioned who God was or his authority. She loved Jesus, and she knew his love for her. Bonnie was always caring about others, and I loved to get a text from her just asking how I was and how the girls were. She focused on others and loved with her whole heart. I will greatly miss her Bonnie wit, her kind-heartedness, and watching our favorite shows together. She was the perfect combo of strength and yet always so tender-hearted. I am so blessed to call her friend and my special sister. David Lynn, you did an amazing job raising an extraordinary lady who loved Jesus with her entire life. You are two examples of faithfulness, selflessness, and service to others. You put Bonnie's needs far above your own personal wants and desires. I know you are so proud of Bonnie, and I hope you know how thankful and proud she was of you.
That's great.
Hi, my name is Jan Snyder. The lesson that I learned from Bonnie's life was that she taught me that you can't fix your eyes on circumstances. She taught me about fixing your eyes on God's character, knowing that He loves you more than you can imagine, that He is sovereign, and that He brings good out of anything for those who love Him. And that's been so impactful for my life, to see somebody go through everything she's gone through, and yet she never wavered because her eyes were focused on Jesus.
Thank you. Right here. All right, right here.
My name is Carol McGinnis, and I have a song for Bonnie. Bonnie they named her, and Bonnie she be. No bonnier lass will this world ever see. A joy to the heart from the very beginning. 'Tis many a heart she's forever is winning. Straight and true were her times as a child, always avoiding the fruitless and wild. She blossoms yet lovely in elegant grace. The love of her Lord never fades from her face. Dance ballerina as the music plays on. Dance for your king, for now is the dawn. Dance while it's day, for soon comes the night. A greater design for your life, His delight. Quiet the feet now, the arms they lie still. 'Tis now in heart the dance has its fill. Dance on, ballerina, dance on through the dark. Surely your bearance a higher mark. Through sorrow and suffering your grace carries on. The evening approaching bids farewell to the dawn. A new dawn approaches to conquer the night, victorious in splendor and glorious in sight. It isn't over. Why, it's only begun. A dawn never ending in the arms of the sun. Dance ballerina across heaven's realm. Dance for your king is still at the helm. Glide o'er the clouds, heavenly music rings. Dance as the host of all heaven sings. We say no goodbyes, our time here is small. Soon we'll be with you in that heavenly hall. Then we shall see what suffering did birth, not just in heaven, but here on the earth.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Aaron, can you hand it to Pete right here in front?
I'm Papa, Bonnie's grandfather. We shared a lot of time in the last 18 years. And what I learned from Bonnie is that life is precious and worth living, in spite of pain and disappointments. Bonnie was serious about her relationship with God and strong in her faith that a better future awaited her because of her acceptance of Jesus. But that did not diminish her desire to continue to experience the gift of life in this world, in spite of its difficulties. As you've heard, she sought opportunities to minister God's love even before her afflictions manifested themselves, working with the children and young people in her church. As her circumstances changed, she discovered new opportunities to minister to others. Ministry of hospital service dogs in her own life led her to rescue and teach, train Sammy, who became the love of her life. She discovered that many who ministered to her had needs of their own and that she could minister to by being a sympathetic listener and a wise counselor. And as she learned of many others around the country who suffered from the same disease that she had, she reached out to them. And shared advice and encouragement. Some of you are probably wondering about the hat. I'm a fan, but this is not my style. However, I wore it 2 weeks ago when we watched the Super Bowl with Bonnie, and it made her laugh. I just didn't want people to forget that she did have fun and enjoy a good time.
Good morning. My name is Estelle. I'm the auntie, brother of Dave. You see the similarity, I'm sure. Mitochondrial disease is a disease that sucks the air out of a room. It's incredibly consuming. And somehow Grace, moving through Bonnie, seemed to breathe air back into the room. And in that way, her story was a real healing story. And it's Bonnie's story that most affected me because family members of people who had mitochondrial disease would often call Bonnie to help better understand their family member. And through Bonnie's sharing of her own story, she would help them appreciate what their family member was experiencing. And she gave me the incredible gift as a teacher of healthcare providers to share her story. So every student that I have begins with Bonnie 101. Because healthcare providers have this decision they have to make. They either decide to look at a person and see a disease, or the decision to look at a person and see a person who is struggling with a disease. It's almost like glasses they decide to look on. Am I going to look at you and see mitochondrial disease, or am I going to look at you and see Bonnie? And because Bonnie was Bonnie, there wasn't a lot of choice there. And so beginning especially my advanced practice courses with Bonnie taught that they couldn't look at other patients the same. And so part of the gratitude that I have for Bonnie and was the way her story was a healing story, and the way that she affected my students by changing their vision permanently. And for that, I'm very, very, very grateful, Bonnie.
Matthew, you can hand it to Raheel.
I'm Raheel. Bonnie and I've said goodbye so many times. But every time it was voided by a text or a note or a phone call. And I can't help think that that won't be the case, but I was 19. I think she was 2 years younger than me. She was 17. I was lonely, insecure. I was needy. And yet, somehow she saw past through all that and friended me. And in my moments of bitterness, she would be there to listen to things that I had, both in my heart and my mind. She knew me from the very beginning of when I became a Christian, and she knew my struggle with that. She knew my bitterness towards my family. But in the midst of that, she continued to just be my wise counselor. She would listen to me. She would speak wisdom and advice. And she was gracious. She was gentle. She was encouraging. And I never understood why she would be like that towards me, because I was rude. I was mean. I was bitter. And it was only a couple of years into learning and seeing Jesus, the more I realized that I was in the presence of God, that I started to realize that because she had been the beneficiary of his love, that she knew that she was deeply loved by him, and that she deeply loved him regardless of circumstances, situations, that love overflowed, and I was the recipient of that. And I think about that every day, and I think about her in the midst of that, and I'm sad and I'm heartbroken, but at the same time I'm happy because I know she's doing exactly what she wants to do in his presence. She's dancing. And, there's a part of me that's sad because mostly I realize that I won't get to see her for a very long time. But just as she was my friend here, just as she welcomed me with open heart, with open arms, I get to know that when I go to heaven, she will be there to welcome me with open arms. So
That's wonderful. Matthew, can you take this? Matthew, will you hand it to Tom right here?
I'm going to stand up here if you all don't mind. My name's Tom Sanders. I would call myself a friend of Bonnie, a Bonnie sitter, a friend of the Codiers. I have known Bonnie now for 3 years, 9 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. And it's all been good. My life is definitely been improved through the love of Jesus and Bonnie being the conduit of that. Bonnie's the closest person I've ever lost. And at 55, that's kind of interesting when I think about it. Both of my parents are still alive, but she's a very special person to me. I've been to birthdays of hers. I've laughed with her. I've cried with her. I've told stories with her, listened to her stories. So many neat things. Bonnie and I wondered together many times how we ever met. And if you know her humor, she'd say, well, Tom, I'm a young, good-looking girl, and you're old. So that is very strange, but it is and I got to say, duh, this is how we met right here. And truthfully, the way we met is sitting right here. Abe and Joy, if you happen to know Abe and Joy, I'm sure a lot of you do. The compassion and the way they told me about the Codier story made me say, I cannot not do this. I've many times in my life said I'm going to do something, and their compassion really made me do it. So if you look up compassion in the dictionary, depends on the dictionary you have, but their picture is in there, and I just wanted to say that. They had a huge impact on me. Bonnie has had an amazing impact on me, and my wife, Kimberly, who's right here. From April 2011, from meeting Mally, her dog, as it's running around the room with the leash on its neck, I have been just whitewashed with love through this family and through Bonnie. And I just wanted to tell you a couple more things. I looked at my last text from Bonnie about, just a couple of days ago. Went back and thought, gosh, what was her last text to me? And I've had an issue lately because my daughter, my one and only daughter, had some issues recently with alcohol. And Bonnie's last text, it was asking about her. And I couldn't believe that. I mean, I can believe it, but I'm sorry. The last thing, I sat for 4 hours at the Codier home, ate dinner, and spent some time with them, my wife and I. 4 hours, seemed like an hour, but we sat there and talked with Bonnie, and she's sitting across the sofa here. And I was telling her, trying to be really deep in explaining how she's been a light to me in my life. And I reached over and I saw a pillow with a lighthouse on it. And I said, Bonnie, and I held that pillow with a lighthouse up to her. And before I could finish the sentence, she goes, so I'm a pillow. And I honestly thought she was going to hurt herself because the laughter, I'd seen much laughter from her, but never that much laughter. And I had to look at her parents and go, oh my gosh, sorry about that. But anyway, so the last thing I want to tell you is she wrote me a note about that moment. It said, I'm honored to hear that I'm one of your lighthouses, and it renews my strength to hear that God is using my life and situation for his purposes. I always think how unlikely it would have been for our paths to ever cross, except that somehow God pointed this guy named Tom in my direction and gave him the courage to sign up at the Bonnie Sit and to look at all that has transpired since. Truly outstanding. Here's the main point. God is good, and to him be all glory.
I'm going to do a few more here.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I had the pleasure of being Bonnie's nurse for the last 5 years. And it was really interesting. The first time I ever heard about it, Dave called, and he's not a man of little words, and so he talked my ear off for like an hour describing the situation. And we went above and beyond to accommodate Bonnie and her needs. And I remember getting there at like 5:30 in the morning because she had to have treatment all day, and just being like, this is going to be such a long day. And then she came zooming in her wheelchair with this huge smile. And I found myself within minutes like pouring out my heart and soul to this woman. And we instantly became friends, and I just bonded so closely with her. And she was wonderful, and her laugh was glorious, and her smile would make my day. And it was like 12, 13-hour days, and it went by like that, and I was sad to see her go. But she really changed and transformed me. I take care of a lot of patients with chronic illnesses, and to see her and to know her has been such an inspiration. And so I thank you for picking us and letting me take care of her.
That's wonderful. Right here.
Hi, I'm Dawn Brown, and I love the Codiers. And I was remembering a story Bonnie was telling me about her first dog, Sammy. She had been praying about a therapy dog. She wanted the perfect therapy dog, a nice little dog she could pick up and hold that could go on the beds, children's beds. And so she'd been praying about this dog. And I can't remember all the specifics, so I'm sure I'll even make it better than the story was. But she connected with this one little dog at the pound. And she went home and prayed about him and thought, God, this dog is just too big for me to be taken to the hospital. So she goes back the next day, and I think there was a really long line of about 1,000 people. And they let her go up to the front, and they said, Bonnie, go get your dog. So she went and she got this big dog. It was this big, and she named him Sammy. So she takes him to get all cleaned up to the, what's that called? To the groomer. And she leaves him there, and she comes back, and they give her this dog. And she said, well, that's not Sammy. Well, Sammy had gone from this big with all his hair that he looked like a stray to this big. So he ended up to be the size that Bonnie had been praying about. And I just want to tell you that through the years, we see God work, and we see God take care of all of the specifics in our lives. God knew that Bonnie was going to get a disease. He knew that her dad was a wonderful emergency care nurse, he knew that he had planned that her brother would be a physician and that they would be the best to love her of anyone else. And they have loved her so well. Bonnie's been one of the longest living mitochondrial patients ever. So praise the Lord for the Codier family and what a testimony they've been. Bonnie loved you, and you have loved her well back.
We're going to actually wrap up the time. I want to really encourage you guys, for the sake of the Codier family, to not keep your stories to yourself. So whether you go on to Facebook to write that or any online forum, or just tell Dave and Lynn and Sean, or write them a note, do this, because these are really special moments that afterwards have long-lasting effect in the midst of this. I want to intro now a song that was written some years back. Christy Brazelton was reflecting upon a journal of Bonnie's on that verse in Job 13 of, though he slay me, still I will hope in him. Even though I'll bring my questions and concerns and even struggles to God in the midst of this. And Bonnie was reflecting on that in the midst of a journal and talked about basically the idea of, as she looked at God in the midst of this, is faith isn't faith without fire. And that so inspired Christy that Christy wrote this song, and then a guy in the midst of the ministry put together a photo montage behind it that you guys are going to see as you reflect upon these lyrics. But this says a lot. This song says a lot about Bonnie.
Christmas just around the bend, and now the leaves are colored fall. She knows each nurse by name, and they do their best to ease the pain, but still no answers have come. But there's joy amid the suffering. She says it's well with my soul. She knows what it truly is to trust in Christ alone. Faith isn't faith without fire, and hope's more than wishful desire. What will remain through the heat and the flame? Faith isn't faith without fire. Often we can't see the reason for the suffering or the purpose in the pain. But like the darkest night, giving stars their brightest shine, and so His grace is magnified. Would you trust Him in your hunger if the famine never came? And would you run to Him for shelter if you never knew the rain? 'Cause faith isn't faith without fire. Faith isn't faith without fire, and hope's more than wishful desire. What will remain through the heat and the flame? Faith isn't faith without fire.
I've been cruelly placed in the order of service. I was all set to make fun of Tyler for being a huge baby. And then I started crying. The reports of Bonnie's death have been greatly exaggerated. I think it was D.L. Moody who said once, in a short time you will read in the papers that D.L. Moody has died. Don't believe it for a second. I'll be more alive than ever before. I'm very happy to be able to talk about Bonnie's disease in the past tense right now. But I'm not going to talk about Bonnie in the past tense because she's more alive than ever before. Don't worry, I have something to read, so I'm not just going to blubber the whole time. Awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. I'm not a pastor. I have performed exactly one wedding and one funeral to date. For a modest fee, I obtained an ordination certificate through a website run through a pastor in Texas whom I'd never met to legally officiate the wedding. I'm relieved to report the couple is not yet divorced. I don't know if you've noticed, but weddings are more fun. They have dancing. As we've heard, Bonnie loved to dance. But funerals may make one wise and are good or more desirable for that reason. This, at least, according to the 3,000-year-old wisdom of the preacher in Ecclesiastes. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Now, even though I just quoted the Bible and a passage relevant to the occasion, I would add, some of you may